Hello, everybody. This is Japhet from the Arc of Trading. I'm here on a weekend with you with a tutorial video instead of a daily top 10 with our analysis. I do those on the weekdays, but on the weekends, I try to bring you guys a tutorial where you could learn how I do things, how I chart, and what my workflow is. And we have here last week, I showed you guys a little bit about my charting tools. And if you haven't checked that out, make sure to check that out before watching this video or after if you prefer. And then I also did some stock trading basics and how to videos. So if you're into that, please do hit that subscribe button and don't forget to leave a like on this video. So let's get right on the tutorial. So today we're going to be looking at how I identify levels of support and resistances, the key levels of support and resistances. So three things that I keep in mind. I keep in mind that, these levels of support and resistances, they're the most obvious levels. So if I'm looking at this chart, if I zoom out a little bit, you're going to be looking at, like, let's say support first. That obvious level is definitely going to be levels where you see it just failing to break below, or like right here you have these areas that you're just failing to break below, the price is failing to break below. And if you're looking at resistances, you have these levels where prices just couldn't break above, like this one right here. We are here today, and if you see in the past, months, yeah, these have been the resistances, and we've had this rally. And another thing that I keep in mind when I'm identifying levels of support and resistances are areas where prices moved drastically from. What do I mean by that? So let's say this area right here, we're looking at it, and you have these multiple tests of support of this level, this price range, or for PSE it's point range. And we see this sudden movement from this area right here. So I'm looking at this and being like, what happened here? So there was definitely prices holding on this area right here. So I use my tool. As I've mentioned from my last video, I like drawing my support with the rectangle. So I look at the area of support where prices suddenly bounced up from, or bounce from towards the upside. And then for area of resistances, which I drew with my horizontal lines right here, I am looking at the areas where prices just suddenly dropped from. So for example, this price range right here, if I'm looking at this, so it touched this price range from this rally up, but it was suddenly rejected and it kept going down from there. So we could say that this is a resistance because price just stopped going beyond this point right here, and before we reach a resistance, there must have been a support. So another obvious level right here, there's an obvious level of support right here because the prices failed to break this level multiple times on these areas. So I'm looking at here. And another key thing to remember, the third thing to remember, is that the area should be tested multiple times. So there should be testing of that level multiple times so that we know it's respecting it. So how do I like to do it? If I'm identifying levels of support, I'm identifying areas where it has been tested multiple times. I like to do it I like to do like a connect the dot kind of thing where I see it being tested multiple times. I like to do it. I like to make sure that it's been tested at least 3 times. So like this one, it was held up here, and then here, and another one here. So I'd be like, I'll draw some people draw a line from the left to the right to connect those dots, but I like drawing my support as a zone because we never know the exact prices for anything. So what I like to do is find areas where it has been touched multiple times, where it failed to break below, thus calling it a support area. The same goes for resistances, where areas has been failing to break above, like this one, and this one. That's why we mark that as area of resistances, and we see prices bounce down from those areas. So when I say support area right here, you see you see the price holding up, and then we end up having finally the price bounce above that abruptly. So you're seeing this price movement that was quite quick on the upside. So those are the key things that I remember. Keep in mind while I'm doing resistances and support. And as I like to mention before, when I'm doing my analysis, if you haven't watched those videos, what I remind you guys of is resistances could become support for the future after it breaks above. Let's say this one was a level of support, right? But then it breaks above and find a new resistance level right here. But we can see, or we can say that this was a previous resistance level right here because it was rejected multiple times on these areas right here. And then we could see it as well on areas here. So it was failing to break above this area where I saw 1, 2, 3 multiple times tested. So I saw that it was failing to break above that, but when we saw break above, we were looking for a new resistance. So after a few days, we saw that it was up here. And as we know, if resistance bounces down, because this is not written, this part is not written yet when a price pulls back and retraces. So we would be looking at where it could find support, because after breaking out, it's natural that people could be taking profit, people could be selling this, and it's natural for the prices to retrace and find another level of support. And the level of support that would look at, or that I like to look at, are the previous resistances, because that's another potential area where it could build support for our candles right here. And just as what happened, we saw a level of support that was formed right around the resistance level that was broken before when prices moved up abruptly. So yeah, we saw an abrupt movement right here from this area of support, and this one, another area of support, an abrupt movement on the upside. And thus I like to look at those areas where there were just like sudden movements. And now we are here on today's date, and we could see that it was failing to break above here. I marked this as a resistance level. Let's say I didn't have these data on the right yet. I marked that as my resistance level because it just suddenly dropped. The price just suddenly dropped, and we might be looking at the candles finding a new support level, such as this one, because it was tested once, twice, and then maybe 3 times here as it continues to go on its downward track. So yeah, so to summarize, when we're identifying key levels, I like to look at the most obvious levels. So that it will look obvious to you because there are multiple testings of those zones, and you would know that if it's on the lower part, it's a support area. If it's on the higher part and it's failing to break above, that's usually the resistance areas right there. So like for this one, this is an area of resistance, but you could also say that this is also an area of resistance. This one, 1, 2, 3 times, and we broke above from that, and as we can see, it rallied from there. So yeah, and also another reminder is that if the candles do break above or break down, we could be potentially looking at the previous levels of resistances that could act as support, like it did right here. And we could also do like this one, when it breaks down this area of support right here, the support could become resistances. So yeah, I think you should be able to tell it by the movement of the candles. So like this one, it broke below, but it tried to break back up, and then it became a resistance. So support areas could become resistances, and resistances could become support for future candles, if ever. So this area of support, if we extend it way over here, it could be something that these candlesticks would be attracted to and would be wanting to retest again after this massive drop in the candles that we saw right here. So yeah, it's slowly moving up. We can tell that this is on an uptrend because of these abrupt down up movements. So it's trying to form a new level right here. And let's look at a stock that was highly traded from last week. So we could I could give you a real life example of how I chart with and identify key levels of support and resistances. So we have here APL. Let's look at it on this time frame, the daily time frame. So yeah, that's another thing. I pick one time frame and to chart with and identify my main key levels of support, and my choice is the daily candle. The daily time frame. So where did we see an abrupt movement of prices? So I usually start from where it all began. So I zoom out, scroll out, and then I could see that this level there was not much movement, and so I could say that this was an area where it started moving. So if it starts moving up, then we could say that this could be an area of support back then from last December. And with areas of support, we could usually see on the upside areas of resistances where it was failing to break. So if I scroll to the left, I could say that these areas were areas that were prices were failing to break, but then suddenly broke out of. So I could say this is a resistance that could be potentially retraced at some point in the future, but I can't tell when. But for now, we have this area of support where it was most obvious to me because we had multiple tests of it, and we can see the price rally from there. So the price rallied up, and then we had a massive down right here. So if you were in January 5th, you'd be marking this point right here as an area of resistance because it reached that point and then it just went down, thus the red candle. So I could look at that and be like, hey, that's an area of resistance and it could be tested again in the future. And when this candle went down, it went down the next day, but it found a spot or like a price range that was, that it stopped going down from. So I could look at this and be like, okay, this was a previous resistance as well right here that it was broken out of, that it broke from. So I could be like, okay, this could be an area of support because the prices bounced from it on the upside abruptly. It just so happened that it hasn't been tested multiple times compared to this one. So I could look at this, and if we look on the smaller time frame, it could look as, it has multiple tests of support. But as we keep going, keep moving forward. So we start from the bottom, and then now we are here until the present day. So I saw this again. The prices reacted on this area. So I could plot that as my resistance, and then it got rejected and the prices moved down. But look what happened. The prices started going up on this area. I could identify this as an area of support. I like to include my wicks, the bottom of the wicks, because if you go on a lower time frame, you will have more context as to what happened on that area. But if you're on a bigger time frame, It just looks like a wick, so I like including that anyway up until the body, and call that as my area of support. It might not have retraced this area yet, but as we are seeing, it responded from there, moved abruptly from this area, so it moved up, and then here we are again. We have a price that it got rejected. We saw a bounce from that area to the downside. We have this red candle, and we have here this big green candle. This huge long wick get rejected on the downside because, as we said earlier, resistances could become support. So if prices are moving up and down, it would definitely want to test these areas of support and resistances. So if you've seen my charts before, I would plot these and will not predict where it's gonna bounce from, but I'm looking at those areas of support and resistances to have the price respond to them or react to those areas. So just as we can see on this candle, it reacted to this area of resistance and acted as support now. So it turned from resistance to support, and moving forward, this could be an area of support where we can see multiple tests hopefully in the future. So yeah, if you see these overlapping ones, that means they've acted as support these resistances. So yeah, and as I've mentioned before in my charting, what I like to do first is identify my resistances. So what you could do is start from where the prices started rallying up or rallying down, but for me, I like to start on the areas where I started. If I'm analyzing charts today, and like for this, for example, I'd start with the resistances. Where did it react? What is the ceiling price? And then where did it find support? Like here, there was a rejection on the downside. So I'm looking at this, and it just so happened that there was a resistance right here that we could see. This range of resistance right here where prices reacted multiple days that it just went down. So I'm looking at this resistance, so I'm going to include the resistance as my support, because what did I say before? Resistances could become support for the future candles moving forward. So this resistance right here could also become support when prices break above and decides to pull back. So for this one, we saw it break above right here, and then look where it pulled back right around the resistance areas. So for example, this one rallied on the upside. So what does that mean? It could be an area of support. And if I would like to just be more cohesive with it, I'll include this wick right here because that was the resistance, and look where it found us, an area of support right here because it bounced on the upside. So I could look at this and be like, okay, these are my areas where prices could test again. So if this does not hold up the support, because we have it tested once and then now twice, maybe 3 times right here, I could say that this is a level that was tested multiple times, and this one was tested just once. So if this doesn't hold up, it could potentially go back to this level where it was the previous support, and also it was acting as a resistance. That's why I like having ranges, so that because you can never be sure about the exact prices where it would hit the candlestick and the wicks. So yeah, that's why I like having a range, so it's like an estimate of where the prices could go. So yeah, just to reiterate my workflow, let's move to another example right here. So basically, we have this resistance. I like to chart my resistances first, and I say it as a resistance, a key level of resistance, because it got rejected Here, once candlestick body just went back in, and then it tried pushing above this, but it broke back in, and there was a response, sudden response from this area. So I like to include as many wicks or as many bodies as I could, so I could even move this further down here. So yeah, for my resistances, and then I look at this chart and say, where did it rally from, and then where. So I'm gonna plot this as my area of support right here. I'll include this wick because it bounced off from there, and I include this wick because it bounced off from there. We saw a massive movement on the upside, and look at where it bounced down after it got rejected right here, area of support. So even if you did not have this candle right here yet from last Friday, you could be looking at this area of support to maybe get tested or hold up. So if I'm looking at this in the future, I would definitely look at this area to hold. If not, to hold and be tested multiple times. But if it doesn't if it doesn't build a support there, we could see a breakdown. Where would we see the candlesticks going? We could look at this resistance right here. Well, this is like a bad example because it doesn't have a body or a wick, but the price really just stayed there for that day, the 13th, and we see a gap right here. So we could definitely see that resistance, and it could be tested. So yeah, that's my workflow when I identify key levels of support. What you can remember is, these key things that I stated in the beginning, where you have to identify the most obvious levels, and those are the most obvious because you see that the prices fail to break below them or break above them, such as this area right there. And number two, remember that they could be prices where they drastically move from. So like this one, it's a support area because it just bounced from it, and this one too. And as you see, we got rejected right here, so it's an area of resistance. Yeah, and this one too drastically moved away from it. And I like to have that as a zone that is of interest because it was tested multiple times. So if you don't know, let's say you're on a current day, right? And if you're wondering where the prices could go, you start from the left. The left is your history, and you can start from the beginning of where it all rallied, like this one. This is where support was held, so you can know the story and figure out what happened the past months to today. So you could build a story from this. You found areas of support after this massive movement from up here, and then it bounced up and found a consistent level of support right here, but it was failing to break on the upside. So when it did, after 1, 2, third test, it broke above. When this if you were on this day, it got rejected, you are probably looking at this previous levels of resistances and support. Resistances to act as support, which it did right here. So yeah, price action wise, it definitely wants to retest those resistances if it's trying to build support. But if it doesn't, you could chart it as a support area like this one. It hasn't been tested just yet. So I immediately just remember what number 3 stands for, or reminds us of: multiple testing of that level, that pricing. So even if it doesn't retrace to that resistance again, you see that you had once, twice, and maybe 3 times in the future testing of this area of support. So if it does hold, what should we be expecting? Prices to immediately drastically move away from that area of support. So we could see potential bounce from support, just as we could see potential bounce from resistances if ever it does test it again. So there are always multiple scenarios that could happen, but yes, resistances where are the areas where bounces drastically move to the downside, and areas of support are usually where prices move on the upside um, immediately. So like this one, it touched the support and then went back in, retested that resistance. So that's it. Those are the three things that I look at when I'm plotting my areas of support and resistances. If you have more questions or something that you want to get clarified, comment them down below on this video. And tomorrow is another trading day, so hopefully this will give you a glimpse of how I do things on my technical analysis, my charting, whenever I upload them. So once again, this is Japhet, and reminding you to stay patient, be disciplined, and strive to be more consistent in your trading. So I'll see you guys tomorrow on the daily top 10. And once again, don't forget to subscribe and like this video so we get more exposure and we have more people knowing about what we do here. So yes, you all have a good night or a great evening, and that's it for me.